Hi, FACE family. It's Miss Alana, one of the attending speech language pathologists here at FACE. This is the PowerPoint I have put together regarding aided language input, augmentative and alternative communication, and more. For those of you who know me, you know I love a good disclaimer. So just to reiterate, this PowerPoint is meant to be an introduction to guiding principles related to augmentative and alternative communication, particularly the science of how we support that here at FACE. However, please reach out to your attending speech-language pathologist for individual clarifications related to your child's communication goals in therapy, as we obviously individualize our interventions based on the needs of our individual kiddos. For those of you also that only see me with a mask, here's a picture of the rest of my face. And I really wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't start off our PowerPoint with a Miss Lanaism. So we all know you can't spell functional without fun. So in my attempt at fun, I'm going to teach you all a word in Vietnamese. I promise this is relative to our PowerPoint. So remember this word, okay? In Vietnamese, the word for bubble is bong bong. Okay, so relative to the rest of our PowerPoint, I promise it's meant to be fun, Miss Lana's version at least, okay? Everyone now knows the word for bubble in Vietnamese because it's, you got it, bong bong. So the actual objective for this PowerPoint is to answer the following and provide you information on the following. So the first question I have here is, what is AAC? The second question is, what are core words? The third main point is how to effectively accomplish robust language input. And the fourth and last point here is typical language development. Jumping right into our first question, what is AAC? AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. As its name suggests, it may be an alternate form of communication, such as in the absence of verbal speech, or it may be something used to augment or expand verbal communication, like sentence strips to expand sentence length. Low-tech AAC is as it sounds. It's a form of AAC that does not require electricity. It can be sign language, picture exchange, core boards. There's many examples. High-tech AAC is, again as it sounds, any form of AAC that utilizes high-tech electricity. High-tech AAC can resolve physical access issues. So for kiddos that have more physical disabilities, not being able to utilize their hands, it provides many options for communication. Your occupational therapist, if this is relevant to you, is very helpful in this area. Another acronym you'll see relative to AAC is SGD. So that stands for a speech generating device. So here at FACE, they were kind enough to purchase the TouchChat app, which we have set up in the classrooms, which comes with various voices that will say the words as they are accessed. I'll talk more about that later. Here are some examples of AAC. Just like therapy, there is no one-size-fits-all. So there are several examples of AAC, such as the high-tech version to the far left with icons, the available keyboard, our yes/no buttons, and some sentence strips in the upper right-hand corner. So I've kept it light pretty far, but again, for those of you that know me, you know I'm not one for short-winded answers, especially if it's something I'm excited about. With that being said, why use a core-based system instead of other AC? So here's a topic I will expand upon more, but I felt this excerpt from a text by Buchelman, Miranda, and Buchelman really illustrates the importance of using a core-based system and why we do that here at FACE. I'll start by reading the quotes and then I'll share a metaphor with you all. It is also important that interventions start at the individual's level of social communication and cognitive development to build on skills in a natural developmental progression. A number of researchers have demonstrated that the developmental profiles of children with autism spectrum disorder, unlike those found in individuals with intellectual disabilities, are characterized by an uneven distribution of skills. This information has direct implications for AAC interventions because it is important to gear such interventions to the person's social and linguistic abilities rather than their object abilities. For example, manual sign or other formalized communication systems are often recommended for individuals with autism who do not speak. This recommendation presumes that the problem is simply a lack of output mode and that communicative intent or language is intact. Utilizing a core-based system, we're able to meet our kiddos where they're at this very moment in their development of communication and cognitive abilities. And particularly, we're able to be responsive to their linguistic abilities rather than their object abilities. So as an example, many of our kiddos are so gifted in things that I could only imagine having an understanding of, right? Our kiddos are so great at creating these block towers or somehow managing to get to the top shelf, right? But their communication and their language disability prevents them from expressing those things to us neurotypical people. So utilizing a core-based system, we're able to be responsive to their needs as an individual with autism. A metaphor I like to use to illustrate this is power outlets. Okay, so let's think of a standard American outlet here in the United States versus a European outlet. If we only switch out the mode of communication, right, from text to American Sign Language, all we're doing is switching out the USB cable, right? We're just switching out this mode. Versus if we were being responsive to our kiddos' differences, right, we would switch our plug. We would switch our plug to be responsive instead of trying to make our standard American outlets from the United States try to squeeze in those European plugs. We can instead alter our approach to accommodate the differences of our kiddos and their language abilities related to their language. I know what you're thinking. Okay, Miss Lana, that's great. You're a nerd and you retyped part of that text, okay? How does it really work? How do we really meet our kiddos where they're at with this core-based system, okay? Well, I'll tell you. It's quite easy to remember. You can use the acronym LAMP, okay? So LAMP is also an application available in the iTunes store, but most importantly, the people whose names are listed here, they put together this approach. This approach is called LAMP, which stands for Language Acquisition Through Motor Planning. So it's a neurological and motor planning approach to language learning, okay? It was developed by speech-language pathologists and an occupational therapist. I won't embarrass myself and butcher their names, but feel free to look them up, okay? Their findings in creating this approach determined that language was most effective when it was acquired as the individual had access to core words, which I'll talk more about on the next slide, when these words were taught in a sensory-rich environment, and the access of words was consistent with a unique motor pattern and auditory feedback. Okay, so I want you all to follow me on this one. There won't be a quiz, okay? Every sound that we create as individuals that utilize verbal speech, every sound like S at the beginning of snake has 6 individual parts to it that we as neurotypical people do not have to think about, okay? So our kiddos, all right, when we think about their motor planning, have a motor planning disability for creating verbal speech, right? That is because of their autism, their individual difference there, having autism. So how do we compensate for that lack of motor planning for verbal speech? We create motor plans, right? We create these motor plans utilizing core words, which I'll tell you why they're so important in the next slide. But by giving them these words with unique motor plans, because they have a problem with motor plans, we're here to teach them. We're going to help with that, okay? Auditory feedback, right? That speech generation, knowing that words have meaning. And we're going to teach this to them in a sensory-rich environment. We know our kiddos love that sensory input. This approach actually utilizes the relative strengths of our kiddos with autism because it feeds into their visual learning, right? So having those various levels of AAC available from an example slide, be it a laminated core board or a high-tech device like a tablet or an iPad, we feed into their strengths, needing this level of sensory input, touching a button, hearing a sound, and their desire for structure, right? Our kiddos love structure. They love when things are predictable. They like knowing first this, then this, right? They want to know first work, then that tablet is definitely coming, right? We love structure here at base. So it only makes sense that the science we use is relative to the strengths of our kiddos, right? Another caveat I have at the bottom here is motor planning versus scanning, right? This motor plan, making things quote-unquote easy, okay, having a consistent motor plan, knowing that want is always on this space on our page, okay, knowing that want, that word means we're trying to get something, okay, having that be consistent instead of adding a layer, like looking for an icon around the house or in the front of a book, eliminates that additional step and provides a more teachable moment without additional demands or steps required of our kiddos who are trying to learn language. I have a few more caveats listed here as well as in the comments on this slide, but another one I have here is hand underhand. So some research was done, and it's cited below, that during instruction, kiddos that had physical disabilities, such as blindness, were able to pick up on motor plans, right? They can't see these things. They have to hear the words being said to them. They picked up on motor plans much quicker, where instead of the adult putting their hand over, the adult put their hand under the kiddo's hand. So just a small caveat to consider, okay? In addition to that, when I mentioned that motor planning versus scanning, so again, when you go to put your hand under your kiddo's hand in order to guide them to the word you're looking for, okay, remember, we always have to teach, then test. Right? We want to teach them where that word is, so when they really need that word, they can find it quickly, right? The way you and I put sounds together to make words, even though each one of those sounds has 6 different parts, we're able to do this quickly, almost instantaneously, right? That's what we want. We want to make access to words quick and easy for our kiddos. Core vocab. Now, I know you're thinking, if I had $1 for every time Miss Lana said core vocabulary, you would definitely have more dollars than me right now, okay? But with that being said, core vocabulary, I truly can't say enough about it because it's so important and it is so helpful for our kiddos. And actually, it's necessary for all of us because core vocabulary, that's vocabulary that we all use in some statistics at about 80% of our conversations. Up to 80% of our conversations are made of these groups of words. So looking at our Yoda here, do or do not, there is no try, are all core words. Those are all core words. Core vocabulary words are used in a variety of contexts. So looking at the 2 example statements I have here, the words that are bolded are core words. I did not do the laundry. Laundry is the only word that isn't a core word. It's a fringe word. That statement is also true. Core words support natural language development. So one of the researchers here, Banerjee, who has a lot of research in language acquisition, so the development of language, okay, discovered that toddlers' first words were primarily core words like more, want, and that these words persisted as their vocabulary grew. So even though these words more and want were among their first words, these words stuck around. They were here to stay. So splitting hairs here, there's general core versus personal core. General core words have meaning across communication partners. These are core words that are, as they sound, general. They can be generalized to all of us. Want, go, stop, we can all use those words, okay? Versus personal core words that we use regularly that are important to us as individuals. For some of our kiddos, it might be bubbles, that word we all know in Vietnamese, okay? It might be iPod. For me, it would be Instagram. For you guys, it might include Twitter, right? These things that we use often that are really important to us on a day-to-day, right? Those are our personal core words. We need those words. We use them often. So what are those words that aren't core words? simply their fringe vocabulary. Fringe vocabulary is still very important, okay? The issue with fringe vocabulary is that it requires an explicit context in order to utilize appropriately. As an example, that word laundry. When I am talking to my nephew about how he's doing in his online classes, I don't really have a function for the word laundry, right? That's really specific to just doing laundry, okay? Versus I can use those words that, oh, the other, did, do, right? How did that class go? Did you pick the other class? How are you doing in class, right? But laundry, can't really generalize that word. It's a fringe word. It is specific to one thing only, and one thing I really try to avoid. So, laundry, fringe vocabulary. Very specific, sometimes very avoided. Gee, who would have guessed more on core vocabulary? Okay, but I really do appreciate that the individuals at Practical AAC, which is linked below in these comments, put together this side-by-side of general core vocabulary versus fringe vocabulary. So, core vocabulary applies across topics, right? It's really not that many words though, okay, versus fringe vocabulary, pretty low frequency. You don't use it a lot. It's very specific, but there's a ton of fringe words, okay? Then we look at how applicable they are across environments. This is an important one, right? We do want our kids to generalize. I don't want our kiddos just talking to me. How do we get them communicating in the classroom with their peers, at home with you, their family, okay? Core vocabulary is applicable to all environments. There's opportunity to use core vocabulary everywhere versus fringe vocabulary. It's really relative to limited topics, and it's really relative to limited environments. At risk of being repetitive, I am really going to prove my point here about core vocabulary. So that researcher Banerjee and their constituents came up with various vocabulary lists. So this is one of their lists, and here are the 22 core words that they pulled out of their list regarding toddlers and their communication development. Here is another list of first words. This list has core words as well as some fringe words. This list, as you can see at the top, was based off the Rossetti Infant Toddler Language Scale, which is a standardized assessment that is often utilized in early intervention. That's where these words came from. This table I got from the researcher Brown and constituents. This table is relative to language development when we start utilizing syntax. So by that, I mean how language develops into sentences, right? From first words to early sentences, combinations of words to provide detail and meaning and more communicative intent. I went ahead and broke apart those lists I showed you previously and circled the words that showed up in Brown's table, that researcher that really paved the path for how we start to put words together into sentences, okay? So here we have our core words circled in red, then we have our fringe words circled in yellow. Now, thinking about that list I had before, where I circled the words relative to Brown's chart, if we look at the amount of core words that are used, okay, in sentence development, right? We look at the examples column in the middle, okay, and we see, hey, that's a good amount of red circles, all right? We don't see the same amount of yellow circles on the previous page, but if we look over at the last column, what happens? Even though we only had a few core words that carried over from that list there, okay? When we look at the actual communicative intent, so the meaning behind what our kiddos are trying to say when they put together those two words, we find that once again, the majority of words that are being used are core words. I did the math here, feel free to double check me, but under the communicative intent column, looking at the amount of words that were there and the amount of core words used, it ends up being 60%. So that's right there in that range the researchers found before, that 60 to upwards of 80% of our conversations are made of core words. And there's no difference when we consider those core words for the communicative intent, the actual language behind what our kiddos try to express when they start putting words together. All right, so if I haven't bored you all and you've held out up until this point on the slide, my attempt at fun once again, who do we have in the corner of our slide here? None other than Naomi Campbell, one of the top models of our time, right? So, how does this really work? How do we implement this core vocabulary? Why is Naomi Campbell here? There's a reason. Modeling. Congratulations, we all get to be Naomi Campbell, okay? The way it works is we have to model it, right? Modeling, that means showing our kiddos what it is we want them to do. Modeling, that's what modeling is, okay? One of my Miss Lanaisms, I used to teach this concept of modeling is demo do. Anything we want our kiddos to do, we have to demo first, okay? As I go about making any comment, I utilize my core board to facilitate that language input. I can point to the icons. I go eat. Miss Lana will go for a cheese plate tonight. I like it. The laundry thing was true, but the cheese plate, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen tonight. Okay, but for you guys, what you definitely can do is model activities for your kiddos, okay? When blowing bubbles, I can do it. Mom blows the bubbles. You do it. Now it's our kiddos' turn. Hands-on modeling. We are hands-on Naomi Campbell. Our kiddos with autism have impaired mirror neuron pathways. So mirror neurons are our monkey see, monkey do cells, right? So researchers from the University of California in San Diego found that for verbal children that have autism, their deficit in motor neuron function still had an effect on their acquisition of language, particularly the higher cognitive processes of language like idioms, right? An apple a day keeps the doctor away. So that hallmark of autism, having a deficit in mirror neuron function, okay, if we want to be responsive to that for our kiddos, we have to provide more. More is more. More modeling. More accessing language the way that we expect them to access language. Demo, do. Demo, you, the neurotypical person, accessing their alternative communication, be it on the device, on a laminated sheet, with text, okay? We have to demo anything we want our kiddos to do, okay? We could simply just hand under hand provide input on the core board while commenting on activities that we're doing for fun already, okay? Teachable moments. Demo, do. So here are some additional considerations as to why I keep harping on and on about core words and core vocabulary, okay? Nouns are important. Some of our kids really do function off of Skittles. I myself need coffee, right? Nouns are important. But if we do not focus on core words, specifically verbs like want, go, finished, eat, our kiddos are less likely to follow a commensurate development of language as compared to peers with similar language abilities. So remember how at the beginning of this presentation I discussed the difference of our kiddos who have autism versus other kiddos that may just have a language and or cognitive impairment, right? If we were to compare our kiddos with autism to these other kiddos that still have language problems but don't have autism, okay? If we don't explicitly teach our kiddos core words, there's just a statistical likelihood that they will not pick up the amount of language that those other kiddos with language impairments but without autism will. Those other kiddos, because they don't have social deficits, will acquire more language, will acquire more core words just because they don't have autism. So again, focusing on core words is us being responsive to our kiddos, knowing that our kiddos have autism. Because our kiddos have autism, we really focus on these core words. I can't say it enough because we want the most for them, right? And the science says if we want the most for them, we need to focus on core words and specifically verbs. Now, we're at the luxury of being an ABA-based facility. So our approaches are always responsive to applied behavioral analyses, the science of applied behavioral analyses. So with that, I want you guys to consider that there's a difference between augmenting language through prompting, right? We can say things like, what? There's a difference between augmenting language through prompting in order to facilitate more independent language versus just having our kiddos follow through with demands of rote repetition or verbal prompts, okay? So I would ask, when I'm standing there with my core board pointing to what? Want what? Right? I'm prompting in order to facilitate a linguistic response. That is a prompt. I'm asking, want what? What do you want? Versus just having our kids follow directions, and the direction being, say want. We haven't taught them that communicative intent. We haven't taught them requesting, okay? We've taught them following directions, say want, results in getting Skittles, okay? So we've taught an exchange, but we haven't really taught requesting. We haven't taught a level of independence as to how we use our words. Now, for our kiddos who are already ingrained in alternative communication, who have their SGDs, okay, I implore you all to consider the words that are unavailable. How can they be described using core words before just throwing out a whole new word, right? Our kiddos are still acquiring language. So how can we integrate these core words into lessons that include fringe words, right? As an example, bumpy, right? We can run our fingers across the bubble wrap and say, oh, like up, down, right? Bumpy. It's like, there's that core word, up, down, right? That's what bumpy is like, okay? The reason we want to do this, right? Remember, we want the most for our kids, the most language. That's because our goal here, okay, is quality. We need quantity and quality. We need snug, the end-all goal, snug. Spontaneous, novel utterance generation. I know go, I can go, I like go, versus butterfly banana, right? These fringe words, we just can't combine them into a lot of meaning. We can't do a lot with them. Versus I know and go, okay? We can use those to create these multiple communicative intents. So when I say communicative intent, what do I really mean? I mean the functions of our communication. So again, us being an ABA-based facility, we know that all behaviors have a desired consequence, a desired function. For some of our kiddos, it's to avoid work. For some of our kiddos, it's to access the goodies like Skittles or the tablet, right? We have functions to our communication. Generally, there's about 15 odd functions. At least those are the ones that are provided picture examples here, okay? So we have to think to ourselves, if there's all these functions of communication, we need words that translate across these functions, right? Our kids need to say more than want. They need more than just requests. Sometimes our kids no want, right? They refuse. They outright do not want to do that, okay? These functions of communication, okay? How do we motivate our kiddos to communicate? Not all of our kiddos are easy to motivate. Not all of them have these very, very highly preferred things all the time they want to request for. Lucky for me, I've already found out that a lot of our kids don't want to do more work. So having that option to refuse and to say no is not only important because it means that they don't want that, okay? No, Miss Lana, no, read a book, okay? But no also can direct someone's actions, right? Miss Lana, do not start singing. It is not your day job, okay? No, stop singing, okay? Now we provided our kiddos control over their environment and what's happening throughout their day, aside from just accessing things that they may or may not want at the time we are offering it. So, once again, how do we get our kiddos to be these independent communicators with all of these communicative functions? Well, if you were to take a look in our upper right-hand corner, who do we have? Miss Tyra. We once again all get to be models. Congratulations. Great communicators have even better models, okay? Demo, do. Anything we want our kiddos to do, we have to demo it first. So using these applied behavioral analyses principles, we can take the science of language development, we can take the science of ABA in that milieu teaching, okay, and break it up into 4 what I consider easy steps, okay? So number 1, who would have guessed? We are all models. We need that aided language input. So what do I mean by that? Demo. Demo, demo, demo. Demo. We are all going to model access to the core words, access to the textbook, where we get our core words perhaps, access to the core board that has the exchange icons available. Okay, we are going to demo. Anything we want our kids to do, demo it first. Have I said it enough yet? Number 2, keeping up with MANs. Now this is truly the core of core words and function. All right, so what do I mean by that? This right here is the motivator. This is what proves that words have function. When I say keeping up with MANs, MAND is like a demand, I mean even if our kiddo says eat 100 times in the day, we need to respond to their verbal communication. In this case, alternative verbal communication. When they hand us that eat icon for the 10th time in 10 minutes, right? We need to respond. And good thing we have our core words. Thank you. We provide that praise. Maybe an elbow pump, right? No eat. We have to wait until later, right? But we acknowledge that they're using their words. That's a good thing. We want to keep up with their demands. We want to acknowledge the things they're asking for. Give it to them if you can. Okay, give it to them as much as you can, as long as it's appropriate. Okay, but we want to acknowledge them using their words, even if they aren't even using quite the right word. Okay, if they're using language, we still want to reward them. Oh, good try using your words. I know you want to eat. No, eat right now. Lunch is later. Cookies are for later. Sorry. Step 3, time delay. So this is based on the science of spaced retrieval, okay? Another way to think about this is practice makes perfect. And it's true, right? Not only do our kiddos need a lot of demoing, they need a lot of practice. We don't always want to have to immediately ask them, eat, right? Do you want this cookie? But we want them to know to grab that icon and to give it to us over an increased period of time. Maybe we have to hand under hand find the icon with them in order for them to get to eat the cookie. Maybe we wait 30 seconds and try it again without doing hand under hand. Maybe then we try after a minute. Try not to do hand under hand, right? These time periods might start very short, but ideally we want to increase these periods of time until maybe they don't need hand under hand or those physical touch tactile prompts anymore because they've been able to practice that motor plane and skills so many times. Practice makes perfect, yet they just remember to do these things across a period of time. Number 4, incidental teaching, the end-all goal. The power of enticing, okay? We don't always want to verbally prompt. We want our kiddos to be independent. I cannot emphasize this enough. We want our kiddos to express themselves without waiting on us to say something first, okay? Enticing. How are we going to entice our kiddos? Maybe I want watch tablet, right? Maybe I can request, oh, I want tablet and I can play on my tablet. It is so fun. And our kiddo really wants the tablet. Okay, I just modeled access to the icons. Instead of verbally prompting them, maybe I can just gesture over to their screen or their book, okay? We don't want to reinforce these already atypical things like rote repetition or scripting, kiddos just interrupting and repeating us, okay? We want to give them the tools that get them closer to being more independent, okay? Another thing I really want you all to consider is that these goals we have in therapy, right? Maybe we want them using these 5 words by the end of their IP period. Maybe we want them putting a certain amount of words together. Acceptable phrases, things that our kiddos are doing for the therapist, us, me, okay, versus you, the parent, at home, a totally different place, okay? It might be different. They might need to relearn some things that they're doing quite well in therapy, okay? We just need language. We need functional language, and we want to offer language that helps our kiddos become more independent. Now, if I haven't sold you guys on core words by just being the nerd that I am, I'm going to have to scare you into it, because there are indeed some really scary facts regarding language development. Looking at these facts, we know that there's this phenomena called the 30 million word gap, okay? The 30 million word gap happened when neurotypical children were found already at an achievement gap, not because of language impairment or any level of cognitive impairment actually, but because of their socioeconomic status. Their lack of money, unfortunately, reduced the orthographic, the written print exposure. These kids just didn't have the luxury of having as many books in their home. So if we look at the 30 million word gap, the achievement gap, that's this first chart up here on the right, we can see that on this graph, the achievement gap starts really early, okay? This is for kids as young as a year who are neurotypical. They're already at risk of reduced achievement because they just don't have access to reading materials. Don't worry though, it wouldn't be very Miss Vaughn of me if I didn't point out a problem that I feel I already have a solution to. So even though this is a very unfortunate reality, if we look at the graph underneath, or the table rather, a minimal increase in reading resulted in exponential exposure to text. So even though our kiddos might start off at a disadvantage and might not have a lot, if we consistently make these small changes, it has an explosive and positive effect. Looking at the chart at the bottom here and looking at the amount of time kiddos spent reading books outside of school and just adding 10 minutes of reading, those kiddos that were at the very bottom, in the bottom 20th percentile, so that means if they're in the bottom 20th percentile, that around 80% of kids that they could be measured against would do better, okay? So at bottom 20th percentile, that group of kids, by just increasing those 10 minutes, they saw a 1,429% increase in word exposure. Okay, so that's pretty significant. That's almost 1,500% by just adding minutes a day into overall minutes per year. Now, why am I talking about literacy for neurotypical kids and discussing socioeconomic income? Well, that is a factor in this, having access, right? Thankfully, here at FACE, we have provided you guys with alternative communication, and if you need it, please message me or just pick it up. I'm more than happy to message it to you to print at home, or if you can swing by the school, they've already been printed for you. They're ready to go if they haven't been sent home already. All right, but my point being is we are fortunate enough to have provided you guys the exposure to core words through those core boards. through those activities we provide you through Class Dojo that are sent home from your teachers. So what do I expect from you all, the family? Well, as we can see from our picture in the upper right-hand corner, keep modeling forever. Model every comment, even for comments not directly related to demands. You can use your core board to answer your spouse. No, the trash will not go out tonight. You can demand from your kiddos using the core board. Maybe they could get something for you this time around. You can make snarky comments. No like. Most of our kiddos know Miss Lana does not like frogs. Comment about their activities. Just comment on what they're doing. Be involved. Good. I like how you're playing. Stop. Ready, set, go. Good going. Everybody can be a model. It's the best part. Another quote I have here from research done by Diamond and Bork in 2018 is that interventions that increase augmented communication with peers, so our kiddos and their friends in class, interventions that increase augmented communication with peers have a number of potential benefits, including greater participation in educational environments, social skills, which actually the phrase the authors used was making friends, and improved attitudes of others towards children who use AAC. So utilizing AAC isn't limited to adults providing the demo to, but overall, utilizing AAC, even if it's not alternative, maybe just for our kiddos that need help augmenting their communication, making longer sentences, not only did it benefit those kiddos that utilize AAC, it improved the attitudes of others just all around them. It creates a better environment. It creates an understanding environment. Remember when I said we all wanted more for our kids? We want our kids to be independent communicators, and more importantly, we want to create an understanding environment that's responsive to their needs as an individual with autism. Now is about the point in my presentation where somebody says, yes, Miss Lana, I read through all the information you put together, but there's always a but. Before I address the buts, let it be known that the information you were given, you were probably given that information for a really good reason. That might have been the most up-to-date information at that time. Now I have my own but. But this area in the field of speech-language pathology, applied behavioral analyses, overall communication, AAC is a very recently developing area. We have the luxury of living in the 21st century. We now have a form of AAC available pretty much in all of our pockets. We all have cell phones. There's a free app on every single one of those phones, be it the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, where you can access alternative communication for free. So, I'm going to address these myths about AAC, but keep in mind the information I'm giving you is ideally the latest and greatest, and if it's different from something that someone told you before, it might be that the science has just caught up with some of those now myths. So the first myth, and this is the most important one for me at least, that tends to stop our kiddos from having access to AAC is this idea that AAC stops further or initial speech development. Wrong. Quite the opposite. There are boatloads of research as well as my own personal experience, and I'm sure many of our families here can speak to this, is that AAC reinforces verbal speech. Our kiddos need to learn language and communication before they get to be compliant to the level of rigor it takes to work on speech articulation. We have to provide meaning and communicative intent before we can work on just repeating sounds. The second myth is that AAC is a last resort. That is just outright unethical. If there is a kiddo out there that does not have a consistent form of communication, that is still using behaviors to communicate, so remember, communicative functions of behaviors, they go hand in hand. I would argue more behaviors is because of less language. It is important that our kiddos have the option of communicating in whatever way is functional that they can access in order to get their wants and needs met, as well as their feelings and experiences understood. The third myth I'm going to address is that there's a certain set of skills a kiddo has to have to benefit from AAC. So think back to when I talked about the importance of a robust core vocabulary-based system. I talked about our kiddos' object abilities. So even though some of our kiddos are really good at figuring out phone and tablet passwords, right? We can't exactly have those kids go in and guess passwords for our laptop or for sensitive military codes, right? These just aren't skills that generalize to these other specific contexts. So considering these quote-unquote prerequisite skills, even though our kiddos might not necessarily look back and forth between a group of 4, 5, 6, 10 pictures, if we follow that science-based language acquisition through motor planning, and we offer them robust language with lots of communicative intent, those prerequisite skills are just all part of the learning process, and they're learning them in a context, the context here being communication, the context that's important. Pointing to a picture in a field of 6 is not as important to me as that kiddo knowing immediately to access the bottom of the screen to say no when they didn't want their drink, they wanted their cookies, right? The last myth I will review here is that there's a representational hierarchy of symbols from objects to traditional written words. Truly, if we look at language development, this notion that we have to have pictures to objects to written words, it just doesn't make sense. How neurotypical development is for children, as well as the development of written words in various languages like Mandarin Chinese, which uses characters, which essentially are a symbol. There's no representational hierarchy of these various symbols to objects to the written representation. It just doesn't exist for typical people. There's no reason to assert this opinion onto our neurotypical kiddos. As you figured out by now, I like to solve problems before they're problems. So here's what to do when you don't know what to do. Be good models. The things that we expect as neurotypical people, we should also model for our kiddos. If our kiddo is trying to put together a phrase, maybe they're using the core board, maybe they're using a device, give them time. Be patient. Wait. Wait as long as you feel is appropriate before interrupting, the same way you would for someone who is typically verbal. Also, be better communicators. When in doubt, please ask myself, the teachers, the other therapists, the staff. If you're just not quite sure, I guarantee the fact you care enough to have the self-reflection means you're trying and you're probably doing pretty well at it. But just communicate your feelings on if you don't quite understand what I've just explained in this PowerPoint, or if you need more examples, or if you just need more support. That's what we're here for. The third point, which I will emphasize, is language isn't always a task. We have to teach, then test. We tend to test our kiddos on their expression of language a lot, and we don't take a lot of time investing in the fun portion of functional. Make comments, play games, do all these fun things with your kiddos while modeling access to alternative communication. What to do when you don't know what to do? Model some more, okay? Model, 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 and model some more. We know that more is more. The more exposure our kiddos get to these core words, the more likely they are to acquire them and acquire them appropriately. I'm going to go ahead and read the excerpt I've included at the bottom of this slide. A therapeutic behavioral change, to be effective, often, not always, must occur over time, persons, and settings, and the effect of the change sometimes should be spread to a variety of related behaviors. Stokes and Baer, one of the foundations of applied behavioral analyses, the science of ABA, put this quote together in the 70s, and it has really just been tried and true. For a therapeutic change to be effective, more often than not, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of settings. In therapy, in class, at home, and the effects of these changes should spread to a variety of related behaviors. When we think of our kiddos' behaviors, we want to think about their communication. What about their communicative behavior? When they're having a hard moment and they're going to take off their shoes or whatever their behavior may be, we want their increased language to spread to a variety of related behaviors, like those positive verbal replacement behaviors. Having that alternative communication available to express they need something different instead of taking off their shoes. You did it. You have put up with me through the entirety of this presentation. Now, remember that word I told you at the beginning of my PowerPoint? Well, let's think about core words versus fringe words. Because you all have done so good listening through this PowerPoint and strongly considering the science and information I presented, I have a cash prize for you. But you can only use one word to tell me you want the cash prize. And the word has to be in Vietnamese. So, would you like your cash prize? Bong bong. Oh, bong bong, Bubbles, I'm so sorry. I don't know what you mean. If you want the cash prize, maybe you should invest in core words, which I should add this to my disclaimer, doesn't result in a cash prize. Sorry, but you're all now rich in knowledge, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to dedicate to this presentation I put together, and I look forward to hearing about your core word experiences at home.